Snow doesn't fall at a constant rate just because a timer assumes it does. I've led de-icing operations at Kestrel Regional Airport for 14 years, the last 6 as ground operations shift supervisor during winter storm season, and the one lesson that's kept every aircraft I've cleared for departure safe across those years is watching the actual snow falling on that specific airplane, at that specific gate, right now, rather than trusting a countdown that started ticking the moment fluid went on the wings and hasn't once recalculated for how much harder it might be. Snowing 3 minutes later. My name is Talia Whitfield. My stepmother, Corinne, is Kestrel Regional's Vice President of Airport Ground Operations, the woman who spent the last 2 years building and championing Holdover AI, a system that calculates and displays a precise countdown timer showing exactly how many minutes remain before a treated aircraft's de-icing fluid protection expires, installed on every ground crew tablet and flight deck display across the airport. This is a story about Corinne, about a system she genuinely believed had solved one of winter aviation's oldest, most consequential judgment calls, knowing exactly when fluid protection runs out, and about a January evening when Holdover AI's countdown still showed 4 minutes remaining on a regional jet while the snow falling on that exact aircraft had intensified enough, in the previous 90 seconds, to have already compromised the fluid the timer was still confidently counting down. Holdover AI came online across Kestrel Regional 2 winters ago, a platform built to calculate precise fluid holdover time, the maximum safe window between de-icing treatment and takeoff before contamination risk requires retreatment, using the industry's standard holdover time tables cross-referenced against the airport's official weather station data for precipitation type and rate. My stepmother had pushed hard for the system from its earliest proposal, arguing, correctly, that ground crews manually consulting paper holdover tables under real-time pressure, in the middle of an active storm, with a departure slot closing, represented genuine risk of a rushed or miscalculated estimate, risk a fast, automated, precisely displayed countdown could meaningfully reduce. Holdover AI pulls directly from the official FAA holdover time guidance tables. Talia, she told me, more than once, at a family dinner I'd hosted since I was 16 years old, it's not a rough guess anymore, it's a precise countdown calculated the moment fluid goes on, updated continuously against the current weather station reading. That's a level of precision this airport never had access to across the 2 decades before it existed. I don't doubt the underlying tables are accurate for what they're actually measuring, Corinne. What I'm telling you is that those holdover tables were always built as a conservative range under a specific, assumed precipitation rate for that snow type, not a guarantee that holds if the actual rate changes mid-window, and I've watched snow intensity double in under 2 minutes during exactly the kind of fast-moving squall that comes through here most winters, in a way no countdown ticking down purely on elapsed time was ever built to catch. I want to be fair to what Holdover AI actually got right, because this isn't a story about a system built carelessly, or a stepmother who'd stopped caring about the ground crews and flight crews working through Kestrel Regional's winter storms the moment she moved from airline operations into airport leadership. Holdover AI's precise, consistently calculated countdown had genuinely reduced the kind of rushed, inconsistent manual estimates that had occasionally produced real confusion between ground and flight crews in years before its installation, exactly the kind of careful, defensible engineering Corinne had built her later career on after 11 years herself in airline winter operations, and I never once doubted she believed in it completely, right down to personally reviewing every holdover related incident report the system generated. What the system didn't have, and what nobody building it had fully understood the danger of, was any way to dynamically recalculate its countdown when the actual precipitation rate at a specific gate diverged from the rate the countdown had been initialized against, a specific and genuinely dangerous gap between a timer that displayed a precise, authoritative-looking number counting down purely on elapsed time, and the underlying physical reality that fluid holdover time is fundamentally a function of how much snow is actually falling on the aircraft, not simply how many minutes have passed since treatment began. Corinne had married my father when I was 16, arriving into a household where I'd already spent most of my adolescence hanging around the airfield where he worked ramp operations, and I still remembered how patiently she'd let me show her around that world rather than the other way around, back when she was still new to the family and I was the one who actually knew every corner of that airport. I think that early willingness of hers to learn something from me, rather than only ever teaching, was part of why our disagreement over holdover AI's blind spot never once felt, to either of us, like a fight about whether she'd earned her place leading the operation she now ran. I need to explain the specific hazard this story turns on, because it's the actual center of everything that happened that January evening, and because it's exactly the kind of dynamic, real-time physical reality a countdown timer, built to calculate a single estimate at the moment fluid was applied, was never designed to track once conditions actually changed underneath it. Holdover timetables, the industry standard reference every de-icing operation in the country works from, were built as conservative ranges tied to specific precipitation types and intensity bands, light snow, moderate snow, heavy snow, each carrying a different estimated protection window, with the explicit, well-documented understanding within the industry that those ranges assumed a roughly consistent precipitation rate for the duration of the holdover period. Holdover AI's countdown, initialized the moment ground crew logged an aircraft's treatment, calculated its displayed remaining minutes against whatever precipitation rate the airport's official weather station was reporting at that exact moment, then counted down linearly from that starting estimate purely on elapsed time, with no mechanism to repoll the current precipitation rate and adjust the countdown if conditions genuinely worsen partway through the window. I'd raised this exact limitation with Corinne nearly a year before this story's events, after a training review of a well-documented aviation incident from years earlier had reminded our whole team how quickly a fast-moving squall could intensify well beyond an initial holdover calculation's assumptions. Holdover AI's countdown is built directly off the FAA's own published tables, Talia. Those tables are the industry standard every airport and airline in the country relies on. I don't think the issue is the countdown itself, it's ground crews needing to stay generally aware conditions can change, same as they always have. I understand the tables themselves are the standard, Corinne. What I'm telling you is that displaying them as a precise, ticking countdown creates a specific kind of false confidence that a rougher, range-based estimate never did, because a countdown showing 4 minutes remaining reads as considerably more authoritative and precise than it actually is, and I want the system to require an active visual precipitation rate confirmation from ground crew at the halfway point of any countdown, not just let it tick silently to 0 on the original calculation alone. That adds a manual confirmation step back into a process specifically built to remove exactly that kind of subjective mid-window judgment call, and I can't build that into the core workflow based on a training review of an old incident rather than something we've actually encountered here. I remember leaving that conversation understanding exactly where Corinne was standing, even as I disagreed with the conclusion she'd reached from there. She'd spent 11 years in airline winter operations before she ever came to Kestrel Regional, and I knew, better than almost anyone on this airfield, how many genuinely inconsistent, rushed manual estimates she'd personally watched cost real delays or worse in the years before any standardized countdown existed. Ground crews under real pressure sometimes rounding an estimate more optimistically than the actual conditions warranted, simply because a departure slot was closing and nobody had a precise number to anchor the decision. She wasn't wrong that a consistent, standardized countdown solved a genuine and well-documented problem, and I wasn't wrong that precision and dynamic accuracy were two different things entirely. The trouble was that I didn't yet have an actual incident from our own airfield to put in front of her, only an old training scenario from somewhere else, and a training scenario, however well documented, was never going to carry the same weight as something that had genuinely happened on our own tarmac. The evening this story turns on was the 3rd week of January, a fast-moving snow squall moving through during peak evening departure traffic, a regional jet at Gate 14 treated and cleared by holdover AI's countdown showing an initial 9-minute holdover window based on the moderate snow rate logged at treatment time. I was doing my own routine walk of the active gates, a habit I'd never once dropped across 14 years regardless of what any countdown displayed, when I reached Gate 14 with the countdown showing 4 minutes remaining, and noticed the snow falling on that specific aircraft had visibly intensified in just the last few minutes, thicker, faster falling flakes than what I'd seen at the same gate only moments earlier, a rate that, to my trained eye, looked considerably closer to the industry's heavy snow classification than the moderate rate the countdown's original 9-minute calculation had assumed. Ground, this is Talia, hold Gate 14's departure, I need this aircraft retreated. The snow rates intensified noticeably in the last few minutes, and I don't trust the remaining 4 minutes on that countdown against what I'm actually watching fall on those wings right now. Holdover AI is still counting down clean, Talia, for minutes and holding per the original calculation, nothing's flagged on the system. I know exactly what the countdown's showing, and I'm telling you what my own eyes are watching happen at that gate right now. This snow's coming down considerably harder than it was 9 minutes ago when that countdown started, and a timer that only knows how many minutes have passed isn't the same thing as a timer that knows how much snow has actually landed on that aircraft in that time. I want to describe what I actually did next, because it fell squarely within my formal authority as ground operations shift supervisor and, honestly, within the one rule every crew I've led has followed since long before holdover AI existed, that a supervisor's direct visual assessment of active precipitation intensity overrides any countdown timer whenever the two genuinely diverge, full stop, regardless of how many minutes the display still showed remaining. I ordered Gate 14's aircraft held at the gate rather than cleared for pushback, called for an immediate retreatment crew, and stood at the gate myself timing the actual snowfall rate with a handheld reference card our crews carried specifically for exactly this kind of visual intensity confirmation, comparing what I was watching fall against the industry's standard classification photographs. The wind had picked up alongside the intensifying snow, driving flakes sideways under the gate lights in a pattern that looked, even to a passenger glancing out a terminal window, considerably more severe than it had 10 minutes earlier, and I found myself running the same mental discipline my first winter operations trainer had drilled into me 14 years earlier, watch the actual accumulation on a reference surface, not the number on any display, because the sky itself was always the more honest witness. The rate I confirmed matched heavy snow, not the moderate rate holdover AI's original 9-minute countdown had been calculated against, a genuine, meaningful divergence between the timer still counting down and the actual conditions that timer had no way of knowing had changed. The retreatment crew completed a full fresh application within 12 minutes, the aircraft departing safely roughly 20 minutes later than its original schedule, a delay considerably preferable to the alternative of a regional jet departing with fluid protection that heavy snow accumulation had very likely already compromised well before the original countdown ever reached zero. I stood at the de-icing pad afterward with my lead ground technician, a careful, exacting man named Osei who'd worked winter operations alongside me for 5 years, both of us watching the retreated aircraft's wings under the pad lights, confirming a clean, fresh fluid coat before clearing it for departure, the two of us saying little for a moment, just watching the fluid catch the light evenly across the whole wing surface the way it was supposed to. That countdown showed 4 minutes clean the whole time, Talia. If you hadn't walked the gates yourself right at that moment, that jet pushes back on a timer that never once knew the snow had gotten heavier underneath it. That's the whole problem I've been trying to explain to Corinne for a year, Osei. The countdown's genuinely accurate for the conditions it started with, it just has no way of knowing those conditions didn't stay the same for the whole 9 minutes it kept counting down. I logged the full incident report myself, documented the confirmed precipitation rate discrepancy alongside holdover AI's original calculation, and called my stepmother directly rather than letting the report reach her secondhand through the normal chain. Corinne drove out to the airport herself within the hour, having heard enough over the phone to understand this wasn't a routine delay, and I want to describe the conversation honestly, because it wasn't simple vindication for either of us, even with a confirmed heavy snow rate reading sitting in hard fact in front of both our eyes. A countdown showing 4 minutes clean while the actual rate had climbed to heavy snow, Talia. That's not a marginal miss, that's exactly the gap you've been describing to me for a year, sitting right here where I can finally see the confirmed rate reading myself instead of just hearing about an old training scenario. I've been telling you a countdown only knows how many minutes have passed, not what's actually falling during those minutes, Corinne. I didn't have anything beyond a training review until tonight made the gap impossible to keep deferring. This wasn't the system malfunctioning, it was doing exactly what it was built to do, calculate a precise estimate at treatment time and count down from it, in the one scenario where the thing it was estimating against had genuinely changed underneath it. Which is exactly the gap I need to sit with, and I know that now in a way I genuinely didn't let myself believe a year ago, when you first raised it at that dinner. I wasn't dismissing you because I'd stopped trusting your judgment, Talia, I spent 11 years in airline winter operations watching ground crews make rushed, inconsistent manual estimates under real pressure, and I built holdover AI because I genuinely believed a precise, consistent countdown solved that completely. I think I let myself believe precise was the same thing as dynamically accurate, right up until tonight showed me a scenario where a very precise number was confidently counting down against conditions that had already stopped matching its original assumption. I know that, Corinne. I'm not angry at you for wanting something more consistent than rushed manual estimates ever gave this airport. I've seen those old inconsistent calls myself, same as you did in your own career. I'm telling you that the one time it mattered, a confident 4 minutes remaining was asking every crew at that gate to trust a timer that heavier snow had quietly made wrong, and the only reason we're standing here talking about an incident report instead of something considerably worse is that 14 years taught me never to fully trust a countdown over what I'm actually watching fall in front of me. She was quiet for a long moment, looking out at gate 14 where the retreated aircraft's wings still gleamed under the pad lights, and I watched her run the same calculation I imagined she'd been running since the confirmed rate reading reached her, the particular executive's math of how many other countdowns, across 2 winter seasons and however many gates holdover AI had calculated for, might have carried the same invisible rate change gap without one supervisor's habit of walking every gate happening to catch it in time. I keep thinking about the version of tonight where you trusted the display and let that jet push back on schedule, she said, finally, still looking at the gate, or the version where you'd stopped raising this at family dinners after I pushed back a year ago, because I outranked the argument on paper even if I'd spent 11 years in winter operations myself before I ever built anything to replace the old paper tables. I don't like sitting with how much of tonight came down to you personally deciding a walk down the gates couldn't ever become optional, no matter how precise the countdown looked. I don't love sitting with that either, Corinne. A system this good shouldn't need one supervisor's stubborn habit of watching the actual sky as its last line of defense before a jet pushes back with compromised fluid. That's not a compliment to me, it's a description of exactly the gap we both need to close. You built something genuinely good across 2 seasons, and I've never once told this crew otherwise, but genuinely precise isn't the same as dynamically accurate, and I think somewhere in this last year you let yourself believe a number that looked that exact couldn't possibly be quietly wrong underneath it. What Corinne and I built together over the following months, working with the airport's engineering team directly, was a standing protocol requiring mandatory mid-window visual precipitation rate confirmation for any countdown exceeding 6 minutes, automatically pausing and recalculating the display whenever a supervisor logged a rate change rather than letting the original estimate silently tick to 0 unquestioned, closing the exact gap that had let 2 otherwise excellent winter seasons of precise countdown calculation quietly assumed conditions stayed constant for the entire holdover window. I still walk every active gate myself during a storm, exactly as I did the winter before holdover AI existed and exactly as I will the winter after whatever eventually replaces it, though I've noticed, now checks the standard intensity reference card unprompted at every gate he passes, a habit he picked up, he told me once, specifically from that January squall. Corinne and I talk about holdover AI's ongoing refinement most Sundays now, at the same family dinner table I've been sitting at since I was 16 years old, except the conversation carries a specific new weight neither of us fully had before that January evening. She told me once that the hardest part of the whole episode wasn't building the mid-window confirmation protocol at all, it was sitting with how completely 2 clean winters had let her trust a precise, consistently calculated countdown as dynamically accurate, right up until her own stepdaughter's habit of walking every gate finally made the gap impossible to keep deferring. Snow doesn't fall at a constant rate just because a timer assumes it does, and what I've learned, watching a system my own stepmother built get this one thing wrong for a year before finally getting it right, is that the most dangerous gap in a genuinely well-built system is often the one hiding inside exactly how precise and authoritative a number looks on a screen, when the physical reality underneath that number never once agreed to hold still for however many minutes the countdown assumed it would. It took a heavy snow reading, a 12-minute retreatment, and a stepmother and stepdaughter who trusted each other enough to argue honestly across a family dinner table a year before it mattered, to finally close a gap that 2 otherwise excellent winter seasons of engineering had never quite found their way to on their own.